Actually have some notes in there. I'd encourage you to get that out. And I've laid out 3 things for you right away. What I think are really things, and you can take a look at it, about what we need to have for a great life. First of all, that you need to give yourself to something greater than yourself, greater than just where you are. That you need to join in with others into a committed purpose, and that's what the church is all about. In fact, if you think about the church, and you think about the impact of the church, in fact, if we go back to those of you that sat through Dr. Byron's presentation this morning, his lecture, and sharing out of the book of Revelation, to be reminded that, that we're in this journey and that God is using us, each one of us, and has used us for literally Christians for 2,000 years to communicate his desire. And we know we're living in the end times, although, as he reminded, which I really appreciated, is that the book of Revelation was written for a people in a certain time. And we sometimes miss that growing up in the Jesus generation. We all thought that the late great planet Earth, and this is the 1970s, and that idea that it's coming right away, and here we are, 2015, and we're still waiting for it. But we know this much, that God has a plan, and He has a purpose, and He's allowed each one of you to be a part of that. And I even think the season that we find ourselves even now is Linden Road, as we begin to rethink some things and begin to think about, as we had a conversation this week with the area community. We had 6 people show up, 2 in the morning and 4 in the evening, and for a conversation about the Rose property, the 908 Maumee. And it's clear that there's all sorts of thoughts about how to use that property for the kingdom. And again, I honor those of you that stepped up and sort of pulled together the plan to make that happen. Even with the idea that we're not really sure what the end of it is yet, and at the same time being able to have a conversation with our friends in the neighborhood to go, oh, this is a great space. And one of the gentlemen that came in the evening actually lives across the street, and he's been watching over the many months as we've walked through the renovation, the windows, the roof, and it's just clear that there's something going on. So he was excited to get inside the space beyond just looking in the window, to actually be able to sit in a chair and enjoy some coffee and cookies, and just to see what might happen. So, but the third point this morning for a great life is simply this: that we need to make the most of great opportunities. In fact, the writer in Ephesians, Paul, says this: make the most of every opportunity for doing good. And that's cool. Now, you need to be reminded that the rest of that verse says, in these evil days. And so even Paul, in the first century, was leaning through, and you think about just the messiness of our world, just the culture that we find ourselves in that's so hostile to our Christian faith. And yet, we need to figure out, and part of my challenge this morning of walking through, I've been really thinking about what are opportunities and how do we take those, and how do we lean into what those opportunities might be for us. And I just do a quick plug here. If you want to, for Dr. Byron's presentation, he's coming back next week, and really, this would be an expensive class to take. And the fact that he's giving it to us with his presence, and we're grateful to have his wife Lori with him. Just what a great conversation, and realizing that we're not even skipping the surface, but how cool it is. Because that book, as long as I can remember, is like even at church camp, on Friday night as we're getting ready to come home, back when I had hair and was actually a counselor in the early days, that was the late night discussions. So let's talk about the book of Revelation, the mark of the beast and all those things. But I'm grateful that Dr. Byron can be with us and can leverage that for us. But I want to lean into this morning 6 things that I think, lessons that I'm learning about how to seize opportunities. And the first one is that we need to learn to say no to good opportunities in order to say yes to great ones. Which means, as we're thinking about some things, we're going to have to really think through. It's not about being busy, as I've heard several of our elders say in our session meetings. It's not about us doing a bunch of stuff. It's about us really doing great things, and doing it with intentionality and doing it with purposefulness, so that actually there's an end result that we can measure, and we don't wear ourselves out, because life is busy. And so, and I'm going to refer to that here a couple times, that idea of busyness. But the scripture, Paul says, I want you to do whatever will help you serve the Lord best with as few distractions as possible. Wow, distractions. How many have distractions in your life? I mean, it's like, even this morning getting out of bed, there was distractions for some of us. I think I've got a squirrel living in part of the old part of the house, and I could hear him scratching, going, how did he get in? I've got all the holes plugged, and So now I'm going to have to figure out how to get rid of a varmint, even though I feel sorry that he's building his stockpile for the winter and he's going to be evicted here soon. But Paul says, I want you to do whatever will help you serve the Lord best. And it's that idea with few distractions. So again, it's not about us doing a bunch of stuff. It's about us doing maybe things with more intentionality. The second point is that everything we decide to do, we need to evaluate. And so even in the season we've been in, the idea of looking at the teen ministry, of our student ministry, of what that looks like, and realizing we've sort of set that aside, partly because we need volunteers, because the reality is if you look around you, there's plenty of open seats here, and we need to, again, begin to think about how we can invite others into being part of this. I mean, I really honor those of you that have called this your spiritual home for many years. You know, the reality is that we just need more people, not just because we need more bodies, but because there's a great opportunity we have. Like last week, those of you that were here for Rally Day, how fun it was to watch those kids. And if you get a chance when you leave today, look at the TV and see some of the particular pictures of, there wasn't a smile, I mean, every smile was broad and was engaging just because it was so cool that we could bless them. Now, some would say, what does ponies have to do with church? But I think the idea is really creating an opportunity because we know that kids today, there's just so much that comes at them that we need, not in a slick way, but really in a way, how can we create a safe place that children will feel safe to invite their friends to come and spend some time with us. But at the same time, we need to think through. And so the writer says this in the scriptures. He says, test everything and keep only what is good. And that's not to say, when we say the word good, I don't want to mean it in a negative term, but more the idea of how does this leverage us? And so I'll reference this here a couple times this morning. For example, the idea of doing kids ministry at the same time with adult church. One of the tensions in that is the fact that it takes the children out of big, what I call big church worship. There's an element to that that I wrestle with. But at the end of the day, as we walk through the series over the last many months, you know, the idea of these, I've left this up here. You know, this represents basically the weeks in a child's life. That's only 1/3 of them between the time they're born and the time they graduate from high school. It really comes down to how can we be strategic on Sunday morning when we gather as the church to help leverage the kingdom in the lives of our children, so that there's actually an impact that's made, and that it's something that they find engaging and inviting. And there's tension in that because it's not going to look the way necessarily that we were experienced growing up. The flannel board that I learned from Mrs. Bowers at First Methodist in Ashland, today it really, even the stained glass window we have here today, really the modern stained glass is this thing, the TV, because it can communicate, because I can share with those of you who weren't here last week a sense of joy that our children had and our families had as they watched Chip sort of go through the auditorium. And it's a little bit reminding them that, you know, it's amazing to have someone of Chip's talent be here because of what he can lead us through. And what a great morning it was. And I know it didn't sound like normally what church does, but what is church? I mean, church really isn't this place as we've talked about. It's really about us and how do we engage each other in our journey together. Now, when I say this about test everything, there's a story that I'm reminded in the book of, in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch. You know, it's interesting that, you know, Moses leads the promised the children of Israel out of Egypt, and then they're in the wilderness for 40 years, and then he leads them back. But it's interesting, we call it the Promised Land. But even when Moses found out about the Promised Land, one of the things that he did was he sent 12 spies in to check it out. Now, I think that's an interesting pause for us to say, okay, that means that even when we're thinking through things, that there ought to be this element. If God wants Moses, even though Moses is sort of knows this is the Promised Land, this is the journey he's been on, that he sends 12 spies, that all that basically means is that he's going to go check out, even though, because he wants his people to be aware. And so the conversations that we're having, both at the session level and as the various committees in the church, as we've talked about worship and we've talked about Christian education, just how do we, in today's culture, sort of be the church in a very real way. And so this morning, as I'm working through this, there's 5 questions that I think we need to ask every time we're doing something. And so the first one is, what do I need to know, and who knows it? You know, it's amazing that in America, 75% of every new business that starts fails. And the reason that they fail is because they don't know what they don't know, which is kind of an interesting place to be. And so one of the things that is part of my wiring, and it's just the way, and as we talked, a year ago, as we were in the conversation, just about a year ago, of my coming to serve as your pastor, is this idea that I'm sort of a guy who's connected, and I value networking. I value, because I know that I don't know enough, but I do know, as I've talked to many people who do things much better than I do, that the sum of us together can figure it out. And so that's why some of you won't find me in the building through the course of the week, because I'm either I'm in a conversation with the Regional County Foundation talking about how do we do Christmas giveaway better, how do we be strategic in the kingdom that way, knowing that the need is so great and the means to accomplish the meeting of that need is always in tension. Or I'm hanging out with some youth pastors just hearing about how do we, and so if you'll think about it this morning, we'll actually send you an email or text message later this week. Wednesday morning is the National See at the Prayer Day, See at the Pole Day, SYATP, and it's where across the country some 10,000 schools will gather in front of their flagpole. And it's always awkward because the kids it's really student-led, and they're not quite sure how to pray or what to pray for, but the idea that at 7 a.m., it's impressive at every high school that I've been around in this region, the kids are there together and praying together for their teachers and for their classmates and for the country. And so be mindful at 7 a.m. on Wednesday that you can stand with them. And if you really feel engaged, get in your car and drive to one of the local schools, elementary or high school, and encourage them. You'll be welcomed, I guarantee you. And so we need to evaluate things that we do. Because it's interesting, there's just these ideas that's in front of us that, so we need to know what we don't know and who knows it. And so we need to find out. Even the Proverbs tells us, which we could spend the whole morning in Proverbs, it's just Proverbs 18:13, it's stupid to decide before knowing the facts. Or Proverbs 16:22, get all the advice you can and you'll succeed. Without it, you'll fail. So, what do I need to know and who knows it? The second question is, what might be the unintended consequences? Okay, so I'll be very transparent. Here's an unintended consequence. As we thought about doing kids ministry, okay, the reality of doing kids ministry, and it's a tension for Nancy and Percy as they do the choir, is it means that every week, one or two of their rock stars who are up here giving an amazing performance are going to be downstairs investing in the lives of kids. Well, that really wasn't the consequence that I was thinking through, but realizing that we really need to think this through, that if we want this place to be welcoming to families, that it's important that we have something to offer them. We could say, well, they just ought to get with it and they ought to just be here. And it's like, well, that'll work sort of, but probably not. And so if we want the kind of experience that we had like last weekend with just, it creates other issues because we have to think about security. And so yesterday, we finally made the final transition downstairs. I finally got my desk moved upstairs, and now our administrative offices are on this floor, but now downstairs is a secure corridor, and the reality on all these things, and there's some of you who haven't stepped up yet, and I want to encourage you because there's some things that you could help Nikki and I do. For example, we need somebody to come in during the course of the week and just put together the curriculum. It's very easy. It's just a matter of making some copies and then making sure that the packets are available for downstairs. So if you're somebody who says, well, look, I don't want to be a teacher, but I could do that, let us know. Fill out your Connect card and mark on the back there, or stop by the office or say something to Nikki or I after service. Because you see, for every upside, there's downside. But if we really want this church to be vibrant for the next generation, then we have to be uncomfortable. Even as the song the choir sang, I'm sitting here listening to these words. I didn't know they were going to sing that song, and I'm going, really? And yet, when he did the Arky song at the end there, I wanted to clap my hands because that was sort of a church camp song. When Rise and Shine, that was sort of a do this, And how cool is that? And here I am, this old, and yet I can still remember those days in Vacation Bible School. But we need to think these things through. And just because it's a negative consequence doesn't mean that we don't do it. No different than the conversation about Maumee, about 908. Okay, you've made this investment, now what do we do with it? Well, we have to manage it. Great. It's one thing to build, it's now another thing to manage. And so, welcome to that conversation. And if you didn't have part of that conversation, you're welcome to let us know some thoughts that you may have. Because we've had all sorts of things, and you can see the sheet in my office. The idea of a mentoring program for young mothers, a mentoring program for young fathers, some kind of an after-school program, maybe a satellite place for the DeWalt Center. But I know that to even suggest that makes Brenda Phillips uncomfortable because she can't get enough volunteers to do what she's doing downtown. And then the whole issue, if we want people to come and be part of this, is that the buses stop running at 5 o'clock in the evening, which means that if you're going to do something in the evening, we have to figure that piece out. So we have to think about that, and more intentionally, we have to pray about it. And I'll mention something about that here in just a moment. Maybe you could write this down, because I think this is sort of the tension I find myself, is expect the best and plan for the worst. Does that make sense? Expect the best and plan for the worst. I actually was thinking about this morning, so I don't have a slide that says that. But this idea that, or maybe another way of saying it is that we're going to work like it depends upon us, and then we're going to pray like it depends upon God. Because the idea of, that's why we covered the people downstairs with prayer this morning as we began, because that's a scary place to be, especially when it's all new. And so it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase scenario planning, but actually my family, I grew up, my grandfather was a Shell oil jobber, and one of the things that the Royal Dutch Group did was they sort of coined this phrase scenario planning, this idea that, okay, if we're going to go do this, then this will happen, and if this happens, then we're going to go do that. And really it's interesting because it really comes out of the book of James, so it isn't like Shell really coined anything. It's this idea that we can sort of plan our days out, and then if we don't cover prayer, we're going to have a train wreck, because it really is about God showing up. We need to follow our hearts and our inclinations, but then if we want 908 to become something viable, both in terms of impact in the community, and then how do we pay the bills? Because there's bills associated with that, taxes and electric, and we haven't even put any technology in it, so we need some of that. What does that look like? But it's real clear that James said a couple thousand years ago, we can say next year, but really we just need to trust that God's in the details. God is making our plans, but ultimately it's in His hands, because none of us know what the future holds. None of us know, what the next phone call is going to bring, and how our lives can be radically changed by that. We live on a broken planet, and nothing ever works like we plan it. You might get 80% there, but there's always this difficulty. So a couple more questions to work through. What's my motivation? What things drive me? Is it about ego? Is it about power? Is it about fame? Is it about pride? What's the difference between fame and greatness? Fame and greatness. Think about that. Is there a difference? Because fame sort of fleets. You're a great football player. You're a famous football player as long as you can play on the field. But if you tear your ACL or you become injured, then you're no longer famous or great. And so the question is, what do you do, and why do you do it? Is it for money? Is it for fame? Is it just personal enjoyment? Jesus says this. Jesus says this. If you want to be my follower, you must put aside your selfish ambitions, shoulder your cross, and then follow me. Now, the messiness of that is that to follow Him may mean that there's a TV in the sanctuary. Okay? Because it communicates to a new generation. And we have to wrestle through that. And we can say, well, we're not going to do that. But then the question is, how do we communicate to a new generation that is so enmeshed in that? And we can say we're not going to do that, and at our peril, realizing that the question really is, in so many churches, who's going to close the door and lock it on the way out when there aren't new families to engage with? And at the same time, we have to figure out how to walk with those of us who call this our home and not be offensive to each other. So just some things to think about. How about this one? Another question. Does it fit my purpose and calling? Luke says this, anyone who lets himself be distracted from the work I planned for him is not fit for the kingdom of God. In other words, how has God called you and wired you? And again, we're sort of on a journey in the near future. We want to add a class for adults who can, for adults and students, for all of us, to figure out what your spiritual gifts are, to figure out how you're wired, and to realize what your sweet spot is. And you may find out that you have the gift, if you like to make food, that there's First Wednesday opportunities coming up with a meal that needs to be cooked. How do you lean into that? And so as we begin to put that online and to have a conversation and do some inventories and talk to each other and really have some hard, transparent conversations, like, no, you have, like we want to make sure that whoever's the usher really has the gift of ushering. Because if you really don't like to engage with people, putting you as a welcome or an usher a greeter is probably not a good place for you, not a good fit. So we want everyone to find their place in the kingdom. How about this question? Is this best use of my time and energy? Is this the best way that I can use my time? And I'm being, again, very honest, as I'm thinking through being a lead pastor as opposed to being a student pastor, how I spend my time is really, really important. And I'm trying to get better at that. I'm trying to really lean into. And if you remember when we started the year, we talked about our individual words. And my big word was focus. And I go squirrel, and now he's living in my house. But that idea that really, if we're going to get from point A to point B, we've got to sort of walk through that. And so, really, in the model of ministry that I think is being put out today, in terms of leadership, that churches are not hierarchical anymore. It really is about all of us together. And so, this is where our conversations. I mean, we have an amazing group of session leaders, our elders, and our deacons. Great people who have great capacity, and they each have their own talents, and that's where these opportunities are leaning into conversation are really important. And then, to be really understand, because you could spend 10 hours a day watching YouTube, but what value is that? As many people do. I mean, you heard me say this before, the average student consumes 7.5 hours of content a day. Now, that can't all be good. I mean, if you think about how a child engages, a student engages, and many adults are at that level, the number of times you check Facebook, and now the problem with the technology device is that it never sort of leaves you. There's a balance that we need to find. So this idea maybe will help us out of Paul, saying everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, and not everything is constructive. And so we really have to be strategic, especially as church leaders. And I think we're all leaders, even the idea of me being the pastor. Truth is, I really believe in the priesthood of all believers. It's one of our confessional understandings, and as a Presbyterian church, the idea that we all are equipped and called and tasked to lean into helping others understand what God's calling them. Okay, so let's go back to pick back up on this, on the opportunities thing. How about this one? Isn't this true? Opportunities come when you least expect them, right? I mean, was the Rose House in the plan 5 years ago? Nope. Was in the plan 3 years ago? Maybe, because you get a phone call saying, hey, it's yours. And now all of a sudden, it's like, it's ours. And it's a great space, and it's like, what do we do with it? But think about that. Isn't that true? We can plan all we want, and then there's just things that come at us. Or like the last couple of weeks, I finally have the bandage off, but the idea of having a wounded finger, that was awkward. And that was nowhere in the planning, but it was an opportunity for me to slow down. Opportunity to finally go to the doctor, because I hadn't gone to the doctor. And yeah, it's those kinds of things. But we need to do this because partly what Dr. Byron is leading us through to be reminded is that Jesus is coming back. And we need to be ready for him. And I want to be ready for him by doing something kingdom-focused. I want to wear myself out in that way. I really want to be engaged at that level to find him. In fact, Martin Luther is quoted to say that when if he knew Jesus was coming tomorrow, he would plant a tree today. The idea of knowing that the tree was going to bear fruit, that he's going to lean into with sweat equity to work towards building the kingdom, even knowing that maybe the end of time was right around the corner. Or if you think about the story of Joseph, I mean, what's crazy about Joseph in the Old Testament, just in terms of timing, is that Joseph sat for 40 years waiting for God to use him. And in fact, it wasn't until, if we read the story, when he's in the prison, he actually tells the guy who's leaving, who's being released, to say, now don't forget me to Pharaoh. And so the guy leaves and forgets it. So he sits in bondage for 40 years. And then finally Pharaoh's saying, I've got this dream and I'm trying to figure it out. And it's like, how can I interpret it? And the one guy goes, oh, yeah, there's this dude that I was supposed to tell you about. Sorry, I forgot. I didn't have a string around my finger. It wasn't on my Google Calendar. Good goodness. So they bring Joseph out of prison. And in 24 hours, he goes from being in the bowels of prison to being the second command next to Pharaoh. That's crazy. And then he leads the nation of Egypt out of the most horrible famine that they'd ever been in recent times. And that's like, really? That's just crazy. And if you're Joseph, it's like, that's a crazy place to be. So Joseph goes from the pit to the palace, and then all of a sudden, and the same thing can be true for us. Now, here's the fourth thing. This is the one that gets really, really difficult, is that you need to be flexible. I've shared this before. When I did my first bike ride, we talked about there were three things that we were going to do as we went out. The one was going to be present, be faithful, and be spandex. Now, if you wear spandex, you know the reason you wear spandex is because it moves with your body parts. So the idea when you're on a bicycle riding 100 miles a day, you want that kind of movement, because otherwise it creates all sorts of other issues, which I won't go into. But the idea that we need to be flexible, which means what we experience as Christ followers in our current season of life may not look the same for those around us. And so we need to, again, be engaging at that level. So maybe you could call me Pastor Spandex, from this point forward, just because I want to, or Pastor Gumby, because I want us to be able to move and turn, to be able to change with the time. Because, and I haven't heard this a lot here, but you know what the 7 last words of the church are? Anybody know that? We've always done it that way. Yeah. I think that's 7, count. Which is 6. Which is complicated, right? We've always done it. We have always done it that way. Because we want the normal. We want the consistent. We want the usual. It's when we create opportunities. So it stretches us. But I think God wants us to be flexible. In other words, part of it needs to be that instead of trying to get ahead of God or lagging behind where God's moving, I want to walk where God's at. Henry Blackaby talks about, instead of us creating something new, let's go to where God is working and walk with Him in that and see what we can learn from that. Or there's a proverb I was thinking of too as I was working this through this morning, is make hay while the sun shines. In other words, we need to be ready and available when opportunity comes so we can take advantage of it. Because opportunities present themselves. But here's 3 things I want us to look at real quickly that are sort of an impediment of missed opportunities. The first one is this one, inflexibility. An unwillingness to change. We don't like change. We like what we are doing and we want to keep doing it. We get stuck in attitudes that are like a rut. And it's interesting. Rick Warren says that bad attitudes are like diapers. They have to be changed or they start stinking. Does that work? You can just keep holding on to them and you've got to let go. And that's a hard place to be because we want to be able to plan. And at the same time, God's plans are the ultimate plans. And so as we walk together in this new season, we want to be aware of that. Because here's what I want to suggest this morning, is that your plan for your life is smaller than God's plan for your life. Does that make sense? Your plan for your life is smaller than God's plan for your life. Because God has a view of you that you don't see. And you don't see it because you buy the lie that you have nothing to offer. You buy the lie that you're ill-equipped. You buy the lie that you're somehow broken because of what your life experience has given you. And that's not true. We are sons and daughters of the great King. He wants to lavish upon us amazing things, and we're afraid to go there. This is interesting things to think through. Because see, we're not thinking as big as God is thinking. I really believe that. Because it's the tyranny of what's in front of us. It's a limit of budget. It's a limit of volunteers. It's a limit of kingdom space. I'll be honest, last week I was a little disappointed that we didn't see new faces here necessarily. We saw a few, but I was really wondering, as I was talking to our host team, it's like, how many folks will be here that are new? And so the number I gave, this is crazy, because I was reading, it was 150. Well, the number for last Sunday was 72. Now, one thing I wanted to share with you real quick, and it sort of was crazy, but in the midst of that, here's where I want you to see something. Last week I talked to you about the refugees in Syria. And this is why I really believe that God wants to do something through us if we can just think it through. So last Sunday, when basically I said, let's watch this video, and I want you to see the life of these kids that are trying to find a safe home. You know that this church, the kids, predominantly, some amazing stories from some parents that told me about what their kids did. $362 was collected as a special offering to impact these kids. Now, I don't know what that's really, $362 is going to do for 12 million refugees, but more importantly, it's about the faithfulness that's attached to the idea that there's a vision that we can make a difference. Even to the point where there was one young girl here who was upset because her purse was in her car with her grandmother's car, and she didn't have $1 to give. And yet somebody made it possible, sort of loaned her. But the idea is because we see that we want our lives to matter, we want our lives to have an impact. Now, that being said, the need is so great, and we have to become strategic. But just because last Sunday there were 10,000 churches. So we were the 9,999 others who were joining with us on Sunday morning to say we're going to stop and we're going to pray for the refugees in Syria because they're just trying to find a place that's safe to lay their heads. And we're going to make an impact. And so we're going to send the World Relief a check for $362. That's huge. And well done. Well done then. But the tension comes in that is that we also have a budget. And if you get out your worship program, you can see that it's always in the negative. But it's that tension. It's the tension between where God's calling us to live and where we want to stretch and live together and be the kingdom. Because I would give everything, literally, if I could rescue those two boys and bring them to my home and what that would mean. Now, there's unintended consequences as we're getting ready to celebrate an anniversary this week. It's like, really? That's crazy. We've done this child rearing thing. But really, I mean, look at those two young children. And we don't have to go that far. There's actually children in this community that need our help. But, you know, the reality is that the children in this community are 100 times wealthier than those kids. Even the kids who went through the backpack line or went through the shoe line at Mount Calvary. So there's this tension there. Okay, the second point, back to this for a second, is that we're busy. The problem that we miss opportunities is we're too busy. So that's why strategically we need to think about doing less than more. And a season of prayer that we need to enter into to help us accomplish that because we're so busy. Jesus doesn't want us to be busy. Jesus wants us to be focused on Him. And in fact, it's interesting, this story, 3 different times Jesus has a conversation with some gentlemen, and He says, "Come follow me," but the man said, "Lord, let me first." Okay, on your handout, draw a circle around Lord, and draw a circle around me first. You can't have those two statements. You can't say Lord and say me first. Either Christ is Lord, and He's going to complicate our life because He's going to call us to a higher understanding, or I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to do my own thing. And the tension of that, because that's an excuse. Because, see, if He's Lord, then He's first. You follow me? It's not my plans, it's not my ambition, it's not my career, it's not my dream. And so even as we think about 908, what is our prayer for that place? And have we asked God, what is His intention for that place? He's created the means to give it to us, and our title is on it. It's free and clear. What does He desire for us? And what did we learn in the process of doing that? Well, that we need a general contractor, somebody who can make sure to get us from point A to point B. You know, right? Because it's like, oh, yeah, we need an occupancy permit, but which we have now. And that's a very cool place to be. So there's a tension here we need to think through. And then the last point, and what complicates us, is simply this, is that we don't have faith. See, I have faith, and I have faith that, this is crazy, that in a year from now this place could be full. I have faith in that. But to get to that, it's going to take some thinking. It's going to take some opportunities, because it's going to take some really creative thinking, because if you just think about what the coffee is going to take before service, I mean, who's going to make that? Who's going to, how do we do that? And how do we create it as a welcoming space? And that's just one of many examples. I mean, the writer says this, according to your faith, it will be done to you. A lot of times we see a great opportunity, but we just don't have the faith to do it. We're afraid. We're worried. We're scared. We think, I can't do this. I don't have the resources. I don't have the background. Too much of my life has passed by. And see, this is, again, I want to stretch those of you that are in that season of your life called retirement. You've heard me say before, Moses was called at age 80 to lead. Think about that. It's crazy. The best of your life for all of us is going to happen now going forward as you sort of align it with what God desires. And here, just a couple more points and then we'll wrap up. The fifth point is that for every opportunity there will be opposition. And that's the tension of doing life. And really that's the question that we have to wrestle through. The question really we want to answer is, who do you think God is? How big is He? And what does He desire to do through us? Can that help us to find out our goal? The kingdom, there's all sorts of things that are going to come against us. And then that doesn't include what the evil one will do, because the evil one will take and he'll have us buy the lie that we do not stand as sons and daughters of the great King, that we do not deserve His grace, that we do not deserve His mercy, that there's something we have to do to earn His pleasure, and that's not true. That's not true. And so the song we sang, as the choir sang to us this morning, is the idea, wake up, church, wake up. So we need to see that every opportunity is going to have an opposition. Paul says this, there is a wide open door for a great work here, and many people are responding, but there are also many who oppose me. Paul knew it, and so we shouldn't be afraid of it. So really, and I didn't write this down, but I was trying to think, how do I give this visually to you? Think of this formula, that opportunity plus opposition. So if you take opportunity and the idea that it's being opposed, that really equals God's will for our lives. And it's not by accident that most of us in this room are blessed beyond measure, that most churches are blessed beyond measure, and yet I think Satan wants to keep saying to us, well, we don't have anything to offer. And it's really, really important. So I want to ask Jeanette to come up. She's coming up. Just to tell you this. Next week, we're going to start a 4-week series based on Mark Batterson's book, The Circle Maker. And so if you have that book, get it out. If you don't, we'd be happy to order it for you on Amazon. Just mark your Connect card. Can you sit? But we want to talk about a couple things because of the idea of opportunities. Give you a microphone. Because really, the idea of opportunities is that you need to take advantage of them. I mean, the idea that you had this morning, sit under the teachings of John Byron, and then we get it next week, is like, this is like amazing. So you need to get up early and come. But there's a couple more opportunities we want to talk about. So Jeanette, why don't you share those with us?
Starting on October 4th, we're going to begin a series called Christian, It's Not What You Think. And it is by Andy Stanley, and we have never done a series of his before, and he is with the
North Point Community Church.
North Point Ministries in Atlanta. And when we think of Christian, when someone asks you, what is a Christian? What's your internal definition of it? And I think you'd be surprised that your definition probably doesn't match many people. If we ask 10 people, we have 10 different responses. So this series is going to explore discipleship and what the true meaning of being a Christian is.
And that starts in 2 weeks.
Starts in 2 weeks.
And then, we actually have First Wednesday coming up.
We have First Wednesday coming up, and there's an insert in your bulletin on October 7th. And this is very exciting because our Christian Ed Committee, who works very hard, and I want to take this time to call them out, Jane Frank and Pastor Tom, Gary English, Doug Baustein, Dennis Walls. We've worked very hard to bring these varied opportunities. And this is something new that I don't think we've done in Linden Road, at least since I've been here. And we're going to try to start small group ministries. And we are also using an Andy Stanley text called Starting Point, which goes very much with your sermon this morning. Because in every phase of our life, we have a starting point. And if you stop and think of when you started school, when you started your career, when you started all of your significant relationships.
How about when you get a new pastor?
Starting with a new pastor, everything. All those are starting points. But we don't think so much of starting points in our faith. And what we've had here starting today, we have a new starting point with children's ministry, and this is where a lot of our faith has begun. Some of us through Sunday school and through significant teachers. Some of us have had a mountaintop experience where we went to an event and we can say, my faith started on such and such a day. Some of us, it's just been a very gradual process where we've, sort of built on things, and some of us are just still sitting there thinking, I'm trying to figure this out. So just like we have to reboot a computer, sometimes we got to reboot our faith. And so this series is so that you can have a starting point today. And not only is today the starting point of our new fall curriculum and new year, it's also the starting point of each of our lives. The old saying, today is the first day of the rest of our lives. So I guess our committee's challenge to you is that you will prayerfully consider the opportunities that's being presented to you, and that you'll take that leap into the next step in your faith journey, because you have to make the effort.
One of the things Andy Stanley says is, that life happens better in circles than in rows. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, it frustrates me on Sunday morning because I don't like this. I mean, I know I have something to offer you, but what I really like is the opportunity when we can sit and have a conversation, where we can sit together in a circle as we did at Maumee and say, what do you dream about this place? What could it be? And we began writing that out. Well, then in the Christian faith, let's dream about that. And so even the tension that we have this morning of our kids ministry, that came out of, really just, I posed some questions and then I just let our folks respond to it. And I think the same thing can happen there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Would you thank Jeanette?
Thank our committee.
Yeah. Okay, real quick here. Just two more things to say. One, a point and then two scriptures just to talk about. That great opportunities bring great responsibility. And we could coast along, like I shared last week. There's a church in our presbytery that is on the verge of being closed. And as I sat there last Saturday and heard two of their members share from their heart, my heart went out to them. People who have been lifelong members of this church. That's New Philly, New Philadelphia First Pres. And then it's like, okay, I drove past the church and saw its presence in downtown New Philadelphia, and I just wonder, from what I saw on the timeline, you're all more than welcome to look at that. It's like, I'm not so sure that they're recoverable. Now, I believe God's a great God and He can do that, but it's just things have become so ingrained that maybe we need to celebrate their 200 years in New Philadelphia and help them do something new. And in Christian circles, we don't like to do that because somehow we think that fails. And I don't think that's the way God works. It's His church, and we get a chance to be a part of it. And so, and I'm even wondering, who left the downtown church to come out here?